Welcome to the Leaders in Housing Counseling call. You made it through almost all of 2019. Still a few days to go, but congratulations. Kind of a complicated year for all of us. And so we're going to mostly talk about what's coming up in 2020. I'll do a couple mentions of highlights from the past year, but really we'll be focusing on what the future looks like. And so quickly, just to go through the agenda, Melody will bring us up to date on the legislative issues in the House and Senate, where we are. That will be, and then I will do a very brief summary of the 2019, couple points that just remind people of good news. And then really what we'll do is focus on 2020, and so Ellie's got going to fill us in on something she's been working with creative marketing resources people that we think will be helpful for groups out in the field and very interested in. And then Melody and Lou Tisler from the National NeighborWorks Association, I'm sure most of you know. We'll talk about the politics of the House and Senate today and what it looks like in the future, given all the exciting things that are going on. And then we'll have a more roundtable discussion about what's happening in the future. And we're going to hit on lots of the critical issues around financial sustainability, around the certification, around outreach, and how to really make housing counseling into a key piece of the housing ecosystem, and also all the good work that's being done on technology and really trying to bring us up to speed on being able to communicate electronically with the other parts of the housing world. So lots of good things there. We're going to have another push for the picture is still worth 1,000 words, and NHRC membership. And we'll have our call a week. It's going to be not the first Thursday in January, but the second one, because the first is right after you get back. And this one will be on rental issues. I'll say a word or two more about that at the end of the call. But this is an area it's a growth area, and we wanted to start highlighting some innovative things that are happening in that area, and ways that groups can actually get paid for their work and do things that have high value for people who are tenants. So with that note, let's flip over to Melody and what's happening in Congress. I understand there's a couple things going on in Congress. Is that right?
Yes. Just to get everything out of the way, I'm sure everyone's heard about President Donald J. Trump being impeached by the House this week, yesterday actually. And that's pretty much taken all of Congress's time and probably will continue taking Congress's time going into the new year. But the real news that everyone really cares about for the purposes of this call is that the current conference level for fiscal year 2020 for the Housing Counseling Assistance Program will be $53 million. And that funding level has passed the House as of Tuesday. This is a $3 million increase from last year's funding level, and it's an $8 million increase from the President's budget request for this year, as well as the Senate's figure of $45 million. So while we were hoping that the conference level will be closer to the $60 million figure which passed the House, we're still happy that there was a modest increase. And we couldn't have gotten this increase without the engagement of so many of you on the call and our partners and members across the country. What we've heard from both offices, both Senate and House THUD, was that this was a really tense negotiation, that the Senate originally did not want to budge from the numbers. We heard different things of before they wanted to stay at the $45 million figure, and then they wanted to keep current fiscal year 2019 levels. And it was only at the last hour when some few $million opened up that the House Chairman Price from North Carolina really pushed hard and said, could you get it to $53 million? And Senator Collins' camp said, okay, we can get $53 million. So thank you to everyone that worked really hard on advocacy this year and helped us fight for a funding increase. those who signed on to the sign-on letters, the many different conference calls we had with people who were on Senate appropriations, those who wrote in and really asked their lawmakers to submit in their appropriations funding requests to include housing counseling at $60 million. We're really grateful to our champions in the House and Senate, Chairman Price from North Carolina, Ranking Member Diaz-Balart from Florida, a very bipartisan team that worked hard on ensuring that their subcommittee and House THUD was around the $60 million figure. Our champions in the Senate, Senator Schatz, Senator Menendez, which led the Senate sign-on letter, dear colleague, asking for $60 million over at the Senate. Senator Blunt from Missouri, who's been a really great partner in this. We had really great calls with them, and they gave us a lot of really good information throughout the appropriations process. So it was really hard work. We got an increase. We hope that we can try and maintain these champions into next year for the second half of the Congress.
So I'm just going to add that we really moved our game up a lot this year, and it's really because of your engagement. I want to echo what Melody just said. You were, many of you were on the phone with your senators. We did these group calls, and I know some of you did individual calls. We had a number of group letters that went out. The Maine people did 2 different letters, and Maine was critical because that's where Senator Collins was from. This kind of level of engagement is really important in our work, and to be honest, I think we could have done much worse, and we have really made housing counseling much more visible. I don't think we're satisfied with the number, but every message we got is it could have been a lot worse, and our engagement your engagement has been critical to all this.
Thank you, Bruce. So yes, NHRC is continuing to prioritize funding for the program for next fiscal year 2021 and beyond. And we'll go more into this as we go into the call. But housing counseling is higher awareness both on the Hill and with different partners in different sectors of the housing conversation. However, without a cross-sectional increase in visibility, understanding, and advocacy from people like you on the call and across the board, the Housing Counseling Assistance Program and housing counseling at large may face continual additional funding threats. So while we had the increase, our job is that we should not get comfortable by any means. There's still tons and tons of work to do with the Congress and administration and so forth around protecting housing counseling funding, increasing housing counseling funding, people understanding the work that you guys do in the field and how critical it is to their constituents and communities. And we'll go into more detail with that, me and Lou, and other parts of the call. I'll turn it back to Bruce.
Okay, well, I'm not going to go through everything. We've had a pretty good year, and I think congratulations on all this. I know you all have worked a lot. Our housing counseling world has faced many headwinds, and I think we've kind of stood up and done a really good job in terms of representing the housing counseling world in the field. I mean, we collectively, all of you out there, the reputation of housing counseling has grown a lot and a lot this past year. So big highlights, the RESPA action and the no action letter with the CFPB. Many groups worked on this, and it gives permission for fee-for-service payments by lenders in a way that is clearer than what existed before. There's a united effort right now to create clear guidelines on how to do this and some higher standards. We'll talk about that in the call a little bit later. But a big step forward in terms of creating new funding stream or making a funding stream work for housing counseling. The work we've done on technology and creating the MSMO standards, or taking BSMO standards, identifying which ones will work with housing counseling and which ones we still need under the leadership of David Young, who's done a terrific job with this. It means that we are going to be more mainstreamed in the technology of the housing world, and this is a really important step forward, very concrete. Freddie Mac funded the effort. We did it through Housing Action Illinois, and they have done they were doing an analysis now on the on how the industry data standards fit in with housing counseling and what we have that we can use currently and what we need. And we're working with that on with client management system providers. More to come on that. But the point is that we've then become more a part of the seamless world of housing counseling and housing delivery. That makes our work much more effective and makes us much more an equal player. So that's been a really big step forward. We ourselves convened 4 homebuyer events through this Deutsche Bank partnership, which has now come to an end. But, it was very interesting because we used it to feature housing counseling and do some innovative structures. We've done a series of 8 or 9 of them now. And so one thing was to make housing counseling much more the reason for people to come and to get engaged with the program. And then we really, really sharpened our social media skills. And Ellie Pepper's done. We've talked about this at different calls. This has been pretty valuable in trying to figure out how to reach people who aren't being reached by traditional media, and how to kind of break into, especially the Facebook world, but exploring all the nooks and crannies. And there'll be more to come on that. But we've learned a lot, and that's, I think, and we've had very good experiences working with a number of you out in the field, and thanks for your participation. That's been great. The Innovations in Housing Counseling series that we do this year was again a banner year, and interestingly enough, we added in this idea of how to improve on the affordable housing supply and some creative ideas, manufactured housing. We're still working on co-housing, and but there'll be a bunch of these things that we'll continue doing. But again, we're a world of rich innovation out in the field. We want to elevate this and continue doing it. There's lots of interesting things about engaging with programs that do employment and how employment and housing can work together, healthcare and housing work together. So these were, it's all a beginning. There's plenty more to be done in these areas, but we really appreciate the support. NeighborWorks helped us not only with setting them up, with some funding as well to do these. All of this has been, I think, a learning experience for some of us and helpful in shaping up what we do. I think I mentioned it earlier, we really deepened our relationships in the House and Senate this year. Melody's done a terrific job, and a lot of you have done really engaged in as well. And we are better known, and we are better known as housing counseling in general and as NHRC. We've helped shape some legislation, especially the Housing Financial Literacy Act of 2019, which we made much more specific and targeted. And we've made some progress, haven't quite gotten over the hurdle on disaster recovery in the CDBG DR bill. But if that bill can get through, I think it'll help with your work in the field on disaster recovery. We've had a very strong year in terms of membership, and the year before had been a strong year, and we know that groups had faced a lot of headwinds, and really appreciate that even when budgets are tight, groups have stepped up and joined and continue to support the work, and so we thank you on that. Really, this is just a rapid fire of plenty of other good things that happened out there, but just to say that we're moving forward, and we're moving forward collectively as a community that's both being forward-looking in terms of technology and in the service that we deliver to communities that are increasingly under strain. So good work, everybody. So let's move on to, let's talk about 2020. So first up, Ellie's got some, that's quite a picture. Ellie's got some, doing some interesting work that will hopefully be helpful to everybody on marketing in this upcoming year. Ellie.
Thanks, Bruce. Hi, everybody. So Bruce talked about the events that we did with sponsorship from Deutsche Bank, and you know, one of the really great things about that was we had money to really focus on marketing, and we learned quite a few things from that. One of the big things that we learned is that housing counseling is a draw. People want to meet housing counselors and talk with housing counselors. The other really big thing that we learned when it comes to marketing is that social media, and we really focused on Facebook, was a big driver of registrations and of attendance. So we were able to spend some time on that and learn a lot of things, and we worked with a couple of different consultants to help us really figure out the best way to target our advertising. And so we learned that those kind of tools also really reach a population that has not previously been touched as far as hearing about housing counseling. So we were bringing people in who had not heard, and that's really the goal, right, is to stop this from being the best kept secret. So one of the things that we did as a result of that was start thinking about, in a bigger picture, how do we make it easier, simpler, more manageable, and user-friendly for groups to, you know, bump up their own social media platforms and really get out there for themselves. The problem is, of course, that, you know, some organizations are already doing that and doing it really well, but a lot of organizations want to do it, don't have the time, don't have the expertise, might be able to start a really great social media platform, but you have to feed social media in order for it to grow and live. And so if you're not feeding it on a pretty regular basis, it will just kind of fall by the wayside. So we were trying to figure out the best way to make all of that easier. So as a result, we reached out to a few marketing companies to just talk about what our thinking was and what it was that we thought we might want to do. And we ended up talking with a few different ones. One of them was Creative Marketing Resources, or CMR, and many of you have probably heard about them because they've been working with HUD and trying to create marketing materials, and did some research on, you know, what to call housing counselors, to call, is it advisor, should it be coach, should it stay counselors? And so they were one of the marketing companies. Well, long story short about all of that, it kind of became a little bit bigger project than we thought we could really manage, and it kind of got put by the wayside. In the meantime, CMR reached out to me and said, listen, we have all of this information, and we have this whole marketing plan that we put together for HUD, and HUD kind of decided that this Let's Make Home Happen marketing plan that they came up with, HUD didn't want to use it and said, you know, you're welcome to use it. We aren't going to use it. You're welcome to use it. So CMR has copyrighted that program, Let's Make Home Happen. And they want to figure out how to work with housing counseling organizations to provide marketing solutions at a price point that can be afforded, and when there's no price point that can be afforded, come up with a way to fund for organizations who need funding in order to access some type of marketing assistance. So this is in its very infant stages, and CMR is creating a steering committee of industry partners in order to determine, in order to figure out which way should we be going with this, and where can we get funding, and how should we structure the funding. And along with that, some of you have already seen and have asked Bruce and myself about a survey that was sent out by Let's Make Home Happen, and that is CMR that is sending that out. And if you've seen it and you're wondering what it is, that's what it is. It's a survey to ask housing counselors to give us some feedback to help us really frame the strategy so that it is something that is usable for housing counselors. So stay tuned for more about that. And if you haven't gotten the survey, please check your email to see if you've received it, or if you kind of put it aside because you weren't sure who it was, open it back up and take a look at it. And please take a few minutes to work on that. And so hopefully we're really going to be coming up with some interesting and innovative ways to help you all with your marketing plans, not just in social media. This is meant to be an all-encompassing media effort. So more to come on that. And I turn it back to Bruce. We can't hear Bruce. Can't hear Bruce.
Well, thank you. That silly mute button. Why was I even thinking that was going to work? So let me just, let's start off with our discussion with Lot Diaz and getting, and we've had big progress now on fee-for-service and the breakthrough on getting clearer RESPA rules under the no action letter. So Lot, give us an idea of what this will look like for 2020.
Thanks, Bruce. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's holidays will be happy and good time spent with family the whole time. It's right around the corner. Talk about lender fee for service. I'm going to just do a quick. We've had a couple presentations in the past at the leaders call on this, but just to kind of put it in context before I get into the recent stuff that I think is going to happen, or it is and is happening. Let me start to say, prior to the crisis, there was a fair amount of pre-purchase lender HCA partnerships out in the field. We did many of them, others did many of them, and they were generally features where they'd pay $300 to $500 for a counseled family who'd been educated who closes with a particular lender. And that model or variants of that model went on for probably, up until from like 2000, I'd say 2002 up and running till 2008 when the crisis hit. And was fairly common, and there was some kind of common, documents that people were floating around. The crisis hit, and all that stuff fell away because pre-purchase went a whole different way, and the emphasis on mortgage delinquency, and the servicers brought in fee-for-service eventually after some settling, brought in some fee-for-service arrangements that were paying housing counselors to either do contact families, carrying them through the modification process. And NFMC was a fee-for-service, although it wasn't lender paid. And we had partnerships with Ocwen and Wells throughout the period, and they were all kind of, we did X and they got compensation in a certain way. So fee for service was there during that period. And we kind of, just as our hope or our goal with our network agencies has always been if they could do 30% of their revenue into fee for service, and believe me, nobody's reached that goal yet. But it's still kind of it's a goal. It would really facilitate investment and kind of more stable housing counseling programs. And so it's always been a area of interest for Unidos US's network. So anyway, post-crisis, so you had the early pre-purchase. During the crisis, the mortgage delinquency, fee-for-service relationships generally with servicers or blender servicers. In the post-crisis, two things happened. One is the fee-for-service models on the post-purchase or the mortgage delinquency was declining because obviously the number of foreclosures and delinquencies were declining, and it became clear by 2016 that funding for housing counseling generally, whether it's grant funding from federal sources or from lenders or from foundations, was starting to decline because they saw the relative importance of it decline because there was just less immediate problems they had to solve. And the pre-purchase market, to the degree that existed, did not come back to where it was before. That is, it was common before that lenders would seek partnerships with housing counseling agencies because it was good business for them. In the post-crisis period, that business model changed, and meaning it got more expensive to obtain or get an LMI mortgage through the system. And one of the first casualties of that is money associated with developing markets like in an LMA, and so which HCA, housing counseling agencies, were a big part of that. But with the declining federal funding, all that kind of thing, their supplementing income became even more critical to many agencies. And so the fee-for-service dialogue really, not just with us, but within the industry, really geared up by 2016. And then finally, in this kind of up to the no action letter period, the final kind of period of that kind of point I would make is that during the foreclosure period, lenders and servicers there was a lot of litigation going on, either DOJ settlements, state finance agencies settlements, and CFPB's investigations. So lenders were kind of in a habit with, having to worry about legal issues all the time. And it became clear around 2016, if we were going to get a kind of an industry-wide ability to partner with in fee-for-service formats, that legal justification, the legal hurdles are going to have to be cleared out. So there was a lot of advocacy by us and NHRC and many of the other intermediaries and other agencies nationally to talk to CFPB, and talk to HUD, talk to lenders about how we get over this hurdle, and which began to clearly focus on CFPB because they were the controlling entity relative to origination regulations with banks. So anyway, so a lot of work, there was like between 16 and 19 when the regulation came out. I mean, that's 3 years of really consistent effort throughout that period, and both legal research and meetings and stuff like that. So happily, that whole story ended in October of 19, kind of ended anyway, in that the no action letter was issued by CFPB, and the no action letter, in the most simplistic terms, is really what is required is the lender who is doing the partnership has to apply to CFPB along guidelines they established and name the partners that they're going to have, that is the HCA partners are going to include. And that process has not been completed yet by a lender, which is one of the issues out there, although I know some are going through the process and they're trying to get through it, and hopefully it'll be done shortly. And so
I can jump in on that, and
sure.
We'll know early January. The first one will be approved.
Oh, good.
Bank of America.
Perfect. So if Bank of America is the first approved lender through that process, that's important for a couple of ways, because it sends a way for other lenders to get approved, and people like to do the same thing everybody else is doing, and so it'll make it easier for other banks in the future. So that's a very positive sign. And then the second part of the no action letter is that any arrangement you make with a lender partner for fee for service has to be consistent with HUD's current guidance on fee for service programs. And so those of you who are aware of their guidance, they have a couple publications on this, but however agreements are run, it has to be consistent with that. And so that is kind of the two. There's still other open questions in this whole thing, but those are the two guideposts that folks that ourselves and others are kind of taking into this area. Okay, so then, assumingly we have regulatory space to do fee-for-service relationships with lenders because of no action letter. And so the next question is, okay, if we do fee-for-service partnerships, what are they? And So then you get a next set of issues in what I call the post no action letter period is really defining and codifying with lenders what the value of housing counseling agency services are to them, and then what value do they gain from a counseled and educated clients, and defining it and kind of making sure they see that value. And the second set is once you've done that, how do you set a price for fees and those kinds of things. And these latter two, there's been a lot of dialogue, at least at the national level, on these. And I think some of it will. Eric, Bruce, you shared that value that NFCCA and Matt Reeby's group did. You did that presentation before.
It hasn't been widely shared throughout the system, and I think they're still working on it to be available.
Okay. Well, anyway, there is work. Yes, sure. So there's work in trying to create buckets of value that agencies can utilize when they're pitching their services to a lender. This is the value you get by working with us. And there's each agency may be doing it a little differently. It can be an individualistic or individual approach depending on your market. So there's no kind of one answer for it in some ways. But the point being, at least the lender feedback is, okay, if I'm going to get in a fee-for-service relationship, where's my value coming, and how do I sell this to my organization? We feel that there is value, so I say that more generically than real. I think most people do. And so then the pricing issue of how much do we set price at? I mean, the requirement, it has to be, kind of reasonable from a market standard, but that's about as much guidance as you get in this at this point. So a lot of on those two elements, that is defining the service. We've been looking at this. That is, when I say we, Unidos US, have been looking at the type of client or the type of customer that a lender has and how to fit them into our pre-purchase spectrum of services. And then for point one, and then point two, kind of doing analytics around the time required, staffing, both in staff time, oversight time, and getting to a place where to develop a cost to serve a client in that realm, right? So it's really for those of you who have gone through the cost of housing iterations that have been out there, because in the fee-for-service world, it probably takes on new importance, and there's not a whole lot of information models out there that we can rely on to say if we fill in these 5 boxes, we'll get a good fair market value for our services. For two reasons. One is, obviously things cost different in different areas, and two is, how one defines the service really defines how much time is spent with a particular client versus another one. And so it's a fairly complex thing, but there is efforts to kind of, and NHRC is part of that, to find ways to kind of, is there standards? Is there a standard way that we can think about this? So we all, meaning all HCAs, can approach lenders with a similar way so it'll become more familiar. That's definitely a 2020 thing. But I think the important point here is that both the definition of value and the service to a lender partnership has to be more granularly thought through. And then the corollary to that is that if you're setting a fair market price for that service, how are you setting that price? And so those are all kind of ongoing work, really critical. My hope, at least on Unidos US, is to have a chance to meet with a lender in January just to test some of the early analytics that we're doing and kind of just really get a sense to talk to see how when confronted with this kind of opportunity or this kind of offer of service, how do they react and to see how they go. And we'll just get some experience with that. I just want to get some experience with that in this new market. And then last point I will make is on the legal side. The documents, there is some confusion around the legal as there always are, in terms of what would be an approved, the application process and in the agreement associated, the language used in the no action letter is a little bit inaccurate. So there's still some confusion. The reason I know that, excuse me, is because we had an attorney who worked with us earlier on previous models of an agreement, went through in some detail with it, and identified some inconsistencies relative to the language in the no action letter to what how HUD describes things. So I think that we've rectified a lot of that in terms of just dialogue with CFPB and HUD. But the reason I mention is because I think there's two things that are important with that. One is what's the standard of what's the format of the agreement you're going to use? HUD has sample agreements in their guidance. We have a drafted one based on kind of those same principles. So those things have to be thought through and done. And then the second thing is, the legal justification for a lender to accept that agreement as consistent with RESPA, the primary one they're concerned with. That rationale is not going to be self-evident to your typical person you're talking to in a lender. So I think what we've decided we're going to try to do is get a summary kind of justification description of why the no action letter allows these fee-for-service relationships with HUD certified agencies in more simplistic terms, so you can kind of continue before the compliance and legal people get involved. You can still continue in a conversation with a particular lender you may want to do a fee-for-service partnership. And with that, Bruce, I think I've talked enough. I'll end.
Well, that's excellent, and I think just the work that's being done on defining what the value and the cost structure framework is of housing counseling delivery. One of the advantages is, as Watt put it, making it more granular, is it also allows you to say, well, but this is the value you're getting for the dollar you're putting out, and to say, well, if you want this level, we need to cover the funding that does that. And so the idea is that there's sort of a basic what HUD requires minimum, and then there's also the things that most of you are all doing already, and maybe with some fine touching may be able to fill in a little bit that would get you into a different league. And all those things have value, and we can reduce the cost for the lender, and if we can make it easier for our people to qualify, these are all critical things in our work, but also ones that we can get more likely to get paid for. So lots of work being done by lots of groups, and a shout out to Matt Riepe at NFCC, who's shown a lot of leadership in developing a lot of the materials for this and some of the intellectual work on it. We're going to go through a few more conversational things with our key people, and then at the end of this we'll have Melody and Lou will talk about the Congress in the 2020 time period, so that'll give us a framework to talk about how things might be working in the political field. So let's move on quickly to David. You've been doing all this great work on technology and the work with MISMO. Do you want to just give us where you think this will go in 2020 and what the value is?
Sure. Thank you, Bruce. And good afternoon to everyone on the call. So as Bruce said, I've been working on what we commonly call the data standard, and that has started by looking at MISMO, which is the Mortgage Industry Standards Management Organization data dictionary, and determining which of the existing 4,400 data points in that dictionary are relevant to housing counseling, and then what also needs to be added to that dictionary so that we can create our housing counseling data standard that then matches MISMO's data dictionary. So we will have our data points that are important to us, but also making sure that those data points have been added to MISMO to facilitate better communication across our various industries. So ultimately, we would hope, for example, with originations, that a housing counseling organization would be able to collect all of the documentation needed to initiate a mortgage application and send that to the lender in order for the lender to then make a decision. We feel that that will be a tremendous asset in the financial services industry and will really show the importance of housing counseling to prepare a counselor and to bring efficiency and cost savings to this entire process. So in early 2020, at the end of January, we will have a technology convening where we're going to present the first version of this new data standard. And then with this data standard, everyone must remember that once you create a data standard, it's not something that you then say, oh, we've done it, and now we're going to put it up on a shelf and we're not going to think about it for 10 years. This is actually a living, breathing document that is going to change pretty regularly. And so once we release this draft standard, we would then be looking to our client management system partners to make their systems compliant with these standards so that these data fields will be available to us, and we will have more information that we will then be able to provide about the important work that we do. So there's a lot that's going on with this. In early January, as I said, we will release the first draft, and then we'll be able to give you all more information as this moves forward, and then you'll also be hearing from your client management system providers about what they are doing in order to meet this standard. But what this is going to do for you as a housing counselor or you as the leader of a housing counseling organization is that you're going to have more data available to show the tremendous impact of the work that you do. And you're also going to be in a position where you can share information with the financial services industry, with the servicing industry, or the servicing industry can provide you with information, which is going to make it much easier for you to help consumers that are interested in purchasing a home, as well as anyone that experiences any type of issue with their current mortgage, that you'll be in a better position to help them as well. You'll have more data points that you can document all of the different work that you've done to benefit those consumers, and that's going to help everyone in terms of looking to secure new financial resources to support the important work that we do.
You know, it's exciting stuff. Hope I'm not revealing too much of the inner nerd here, but this is an opportunity to really become more deeply integrated into the housing purchase system and retention system, and it will make us more vital to this process. So I'm loving that we'll be doing a better job at being able to track outcomes, that you won't have that we'll try to create an environment where you don't have to rekey information if you have to deal with different CMS providers or different funding sources, that these will all have the ability to flow if you have the proper permissions and authorizations. This is kind of us getting into the future. So pretty exciting stuff. So let's move on to engaging with the public and making housing counseling kind of a central way that people think about buying a house or keeping a house or dealing with their financial world. So Marcia Griffin, as everybody knows, founder and head of the CEO of Home for USA, and is also been a very creative force in doing outreach marketing and helping us think about this stuff more broadly. So Marcia, what's your vision for 2020 about what we're going to do to make things work and change things?
Well, Bruce, I'm not sure if everyone can hear me. I must say that I am being linked to you through Ellie, and I hope that you can hear my words here. Guys, I had a little bit of a problem on my antiquated phone, like yours, Lot. These Blackberries trying to get into the call. But first of all, I just want to say I've listened to many of the comments. Bruce and Ellie and team, you guys are doing a fantastic job with these calls and keeping us above the fray and you know, in terms of information and communication. We appreciate that. Lot and David, great comments from both of you on data as well as on the fee for service. Let me just jump into the marketing component, if you will, hopefully everyone can hear my comments. I want to just address two elements. The first is marketing to our lending partners and funders, particularly in the mortgage industry. When I think about that partner, I'm thinking about, and I'll spell this out, AII equals P. AII equals P. The thing that these lenders and our partners who we are constantly fighting with to pay us what we feel we are worth and pay us what we feel we're delivering to them, it is important for them to know that we as a team and we as individuals on a local basis can access borrowers, can access home buyers in a way that they can't. I mean, the people that we access are not people that their loan officers are getting. So we are bringing to their doorsteps, to their door, to their front door, people who they have not been able to access. And also we're bringing them people, many of whom are hopefully prepared and mortgage ready. But even if not, you know, the fact that our outreach, our classes, the exposure that we're able to give to these lenders, it's really putting them in touch with people that they are not normally working with. That's a plus. The other I is influence. When we talk about the work that we're doing, not only with home buyers, homeowners, but also with community influencers, community giants, political folks, we really have an edge, guys, on our ability to influence their thinking in a way that these lenders and our potential partners cannot. We're able to put them in environments that they could not get into themselves in terms of meetings or classes with, you know, all of these things. So these are some qualitative improvements, some qualitative benefits that we bring to the table. So the access, the influence, also in the increased productivity and increased production. The mortgage industry is constantly talking about a looming recession, where they're going to get approvable loans. We know from minority communities and all of the, I won't say all, but most of the people that we work with, I mean, it is difficult to get folks mortgage ready and get folks, you know, ready to sort of go through all the way to closing. So the work that they do with us, and yes, the data is important, but we need to get people who, from these lending environments, to work with us, people who are dedicated, people who are willing to come to our office and build a relationship, because that's the whole basis of business. It's really the relationships, and people give to people that they know and trust. So it's the access, it's the influence, it's the increased production and productivity, and all of that where our lending community is concerned is about partnerships. And the partnerships that we gather and we gain with these lenders, you know, has to be a mutually beneficial partnerships. Everybody wants a loan, everybody wants a new borrower, but if it's costing us $1,000 and they're only willing to pay $100, we have somewhat of a problem. And the other thing that I must say is that the fee for service is great. That is a step in the right direction. But at the end of the day, fee for service at the back end is understandable. We have to have some money on the front end in order to produce people on the back end. So the marketing, the outreach, the classes, the work that we're doing is critical. And this is something that we in building the relationships with these lending partners, they need to be a part. They would want to be a part because they get, many of them, CRA credit for just sort of being out there in the community with us. It is important as we build these relationships to give our lending partners all the recognition that we can and that they deserve for being with us, just notes of thank you and just little things to just sort of recognize that they have been good, because that will build our relationship with them and hopefully increase the funding that we get. On the part of our home buyers, the bottom line is a lot of people have just lost hope. They are, many of the millennials and Gen Zs, my God, they're just overwhelmed with debt. And it is just shocking for us as we work with even new college students, how dismayed they are about their long-term productivity. Where am I going to end up? Am I going to get a job that's paying me enough money to pay off these student loans and live well and, and just do well in life? So certainly for us, what we found in Home Free USA is that there really needs to be a new message. Defining FHA is just not going to get people to a class. People need to understand, certainly down payment money, where they can get it. They need to be motivated to understand that where there's a will, there's a way, that you can crawl today and run tomorrow, but you have to make a commitment yourself, and we have to work together. This is our job in the industry. So the message has to be one that's focused on what their needs are, which is really money, how I'm going to put my hands on some money, and what I need to do to get my financial house in order. Unfortunately, the whole lending community, they have led people to think that they can just go to a credit repair company, and that credit repair company is just going to be an angel to wipe away all the debt. I mean, most of these folks haven't even looked at a credit report, let alone, they're paying people every month to work with these credit repair companies. We know that some of that might be fine, but a lot of it is not good, and it just doesn't help the person to move forward. So the message of empowerment is critical, where they can put their hands on some money, easier ways for them to try to deal with their credit. This is what people are looking for and looking at. They want to see models and testimonials of people like themselves, single parents who have become a homeowner. Or we find a lot of single women, they have money, but they're scared to death. So testimonies from them about how they've done it, why they've done it, and how much better they feel. And I had a 530 credit score at one point, but I came to such and such, and they really helped. So the messages, and of course the messengers, are really important. Churches are important. Of course, everybody goes to churches, and we have not found that to be that great. But people are in churches. But we have the greatest number of people that we've gotten have come, and I'm sure with you guys too, come from word of mouth. The people that we're working with who are referring other people to us, realtors who might be willing to refer, the loan officers, my God, they're dealing with a lot of people that they can't touch either. That's another project that we need to work on in 2020 to get the senior people in these companies to perhaps send the people who are not quite ready. I'm not necessarily talking about the ones who are denied, because by the time they get denied, they're already pissed off. This is what we have found out. But since, these loan officers meet people every day, and they know that the people are not quite ready, they can ask a couple of questions. Well, how about them just saying, look, I'm going to make a warm transfer call, a nonprofit that I work with, and work with them, and we're going to get you ready. So it's all about getting people to understand where there's a will, that there's a way. It's all about getting these lenders to understand that we bring a tremendous value to them. And yes, we are getting to a point where we're able to quantify the data, but there is a lot of qualifiable data that we can bring to the table. Just come and teach a class, be with us for our various events, and things will surely get better. And we're looking forward to a better and good 2020, despite all of the rumors of declining sales and everything else. We just got to look at things in a positive way and keep it going.
And, relationship is everything in all this. We're a trusted advisor, and we need to, and that's a card we need to continue to play. But that's really great. We're going to run over time because we've got plenty more to cover, and so we'll probably go another 15 or 20 minutes after I want to make sure we have enough time for the conversation about the House and Senate as well. So we may go as much as half an hour over time, but but this is all very helpful. The last one we wanted to touch on was with Ellie Pepper on where things are at with certification and what's going to happen in 2020.
Thanks, Bruce. Hi, everybody. So as many of you probably know at this point, as of December 1st, 2019, 36% of the HUD-approved agencies had at least one housing counselor certified. So that's kind of dismal. We had hoped to be at least 50% by the end of 2019, if not more. But so there's a few things that we are hoping will help with this process. So first of all, we're working on a couple of different prongs. One of them being really working with the counselors who are currently working and providing support to help them get over the finish line and get passing the exam. And one of the things NHRC is directly doing, we're starting a second study buddy group. And so as of this morning, I so far had 50 people who had answered the survey that I had put out. I will be sending the survey again after the holiday. I'm giving people until January 10th to complete it. One of the things that I did before doing that survey was I did a quick survey of those that had already participated in a study group to kind of find out, where you at, did you do it, did it work, if it didn't work, why didn't it work? And there was two things that really came up. Number one, people said that they just couldn't find the time in their workday. It just wasn't possible. As much as they wanted to be part of a study group, they didn't have time in their workday. So I think that it bears repeating here on this call that if you are a director or a manager, it is really important to give your counselors time during their workday to study. And what we have heard is that a good standard is at least 1 hour a day. And just remember that not having at least one certified counselor on staff means that you are in danger of losing your HUD approval. And also, after August 1st, 2020, only certified counselors can provide housing counseling under HUD, any kind of housing counseling. So just be thinking about that and how important it is to really support counselors in their efforts to study. So that was one thing. The second thing that I heard a lot about was when we put together the groups the last time, we paid less attention to time zones than we did to learning levels and learning styles and so on. And so this time around, we're going to pay more attention to time zones because I think it creates a difficulty for people to be able to set up a time that everybody can work within, especially if one's on the East Coast and one is on the West Coast. So until January 10th, if you did not see this survey and you're interested in it, please feel free to email me and I will send the link. Again, I will send it out to the Leaders in Housing Counseling list again after the new year. Around the other side of things is, so what happens after, what happens as of 8/2/2020? And one of the things that we've been working on is trying to create a pipeline of housing counselors and really creating a career path, that this is a career that people want to enter, rather than it being something that they just fall into. And I steal that from David Young from Housing Action Illinois, but I just think it's a perfect way to describe what it is that we're trying to do. So some of the recruiting things that we've been talking about are really working with students who are involved in the Home for USA financial advisor program with the historically Black colleges and universities. We've talked with, again, Housing Action Illinois is creating a specific training program and working with those who are going through the financial counseling certification, and also talking about recruiting through our counseling clients and tapping some of those people who have been through our services and might be a good fit for housing counseling. I've started to have a couple of conversations with organizations that have already done a little bit of that. So I'm happy to hear from people about what you think and what you think might work for really recruiting from our client base. And then another thing that we did hear from a couple of different places was it would be really great if there was a way to provide a service that could help people with their student loans. And we know that there's been a lot of issue with the public forgiveness, student loan forgiveness program, and that it hasn't really worked very well. And so we did some research on what might work, and we ended up with this group that is a social enterprise startup staffed by some people who come out of the CFPB student loan work. And they have created a website that for free, anybody can go in and walk through some pretty simple steps to determine whether or not they're eligible for a repayment plan. You do have to have a federal student loan in order to get the repayment plan, and to figure out which repayment plan they should be in, and then provide assistance or information about what documents they have to submit and where to submit them. And then another aspect that is free is providing documents, templates for people to submit on an annual basis in order to verify that they are at an eligible agency in order to get credit for public, for the student loan forgiveness program. That's free, and it can also, if they're for a fee, people can pay the fee and get hands-on assistance with submitting documents. So we're looking into that and how we might be able to make use of that, not only for potential recruits through the counseling pipeline, but also for their family members, for current housing counseling staff and employees of nonprofit organizations, and then also as an option to allow, make sure that our clients know about this as well. So those are some of the things that we're working on. Not a lot of details at this point, but stay tuned, and I look forward to hearing more from all of you.
So, and there'll be a push that a number of the leading housing counseling groups are involved with to get more funding to provide extended training for counselors in the existing world, and we're also working to raise some money to recruit new counselors, new people to the field as well, to fill any gaps that exist. And then that two-prong effort that Ellie mentioned, hopefully we'll see real movement on this spring and be able to really get a lot more people across the finish line One of the things about this new staffer recruitment is that we're working with Housing Action Illinois, and we will with other training organizations as well, with the idea that they really focus people on passing the test, and then go out into the job market to see what housing counseling jobs there are, and that it's sort of like, you know, with a loan officer, you have to pass the test before you can actually close loans. Trying to get people, get a core group of people that will fit into that, and then that'll be a regular flow of people that we can recruit and bring in whenever organizations need. So you know, we're trying things, and we'll see what works out there in the field. But hopefully, this will address all the issues that we're having on this front, both sides of it. Cool. Okay. Well, I mean, I know there's a lot more to say, but maybe let's. Why don't we flip over to what's happening in Congress?
We have a few questions for this section if we want to go over there, or do you want to hold on it?
You know, what I was going to say is, why don't we do the Congress first and then take the questions?
Certainly. All right, Lou, you there?
I am here.
All right. So a lot has happened. It's been a pretty active year, if I do say so myself. Just to echo some of what Bruce said earlier in the call, the National Housing Resource Center has done a lot of work to really improve our reputation on the Hill. We developed really great relationships with the House Financial Services. Chairwoman Maxine Waters really has done a great job, just to her credit, of bringing back to the forefront of the national conversations on policy housing, affordable housing, homelessness, housing for different groups, foster youth, persons with disabilities, low and moderate income households. In fact, at the beginning of the year, Bruce and I found out that in their policy document to establish their priorities for the year, she included housing counseling, its importance, and how the Housing Counseling Assistance Program needs additional funds in order to really be productive in its efforts. So we had really great conversations with their staff. We improved our relationship with House Appropriations, and they've really fought hard this year, as we said earlier, around increasing funding, which is the only reason, let me be very clear, besides engaging members and stakeholders, we were able to get that modest increase. So we see the fruit of our labor. We see how important it is to have an engaged network and membership. We see how important it is to keep the drumbeat alive on pushing for funding and pushing for housing counseling to be thought of the national conversation on housing in general. But there's so much more work we can do. Some of the things that came up, Lou, while we were doing advocacy in particular was a lot of groups would tell us we don't have the manpower to do advocacy work. We don't have the funds. We're tight as it is because we're working really hard on providing assistance to these households and families and individuals. And a lot of people would also say that we can't do lobbying because of our tax status and lots of confusion there. Given that you are the fancy executive director and you work really closely with a lot of these groups, what would you say that you've heard over the year around advocacy and sort of best practices and what we could probably do going in 2020 to continue engagement?
Sure. So I would just say that if you're not going to advocate for yourself, then who will? And so that's really to look at it first and foremost. And a lot of times I've heard in terms of talking to boards, and so I'm the executive director of the National Trade Association for NeighborWorks groups, and I've heard boards say, you know, it's not in our mission. We're not allowed to do that. We're a 501c3, and you can do it, and you should do it. And you know, the expenditure test to see if you need to report it is about 20% of your budget if you have less than a $500,000 budget, and it ramps up from there. And I'm not going to get into the weeds with that, but it is incredibly important to tell your story. And the thing is that we all have done it, working for organizations. We've all done it on the local level. when you talk to city council, county council, mayors, and things along those lines, you're advocating the same way that you would do on the federal level. It's just that they might have nicer offices, you have to go to them, and things along those lines. But the thing is that we talk about going to DC and working the Hill, but you could be working the Hill from your office every day, whether that's shooting an email to a staffer who's responsible for housing and letting them know what's going on, inviting for ribbon cuttings, things along those lines, and saying, this is why we do what we do. And the thing is that it is almost as important as any other communication or social media campaign you do. Just probably a half hour ago, the minibus just passed the Senate, 71 to 23. So definitely bipartisan support for the THUD and related agencies budget, and there was a bunch of other bills attached to that, 7 others. And the thing is that almost every one of the budget line items received a bump or stayed steady. The only one that didn't was the Native CDBG block grant or the Native Housing Block Grant Program, and it went down a little bit, but not significantly. So, that is really testament to those who do it. Now, the National Low Income Housing Coalition do it. Others do it. Other people have lobbyists. The Rural Initiative has lobbyists. But at the end of the day, there's nothing better than hearing from a constituent who's doing good work in helping other constituents. So, don't sit on the sideline. Get in there. Roll your sleeves up. It's just like talking to city council or any other person that you want to talk to sway in terms of supporting what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
100% agree. I definitely think that people need to get over the stigma of talking to federal legislators. They're like anyone else they've talked to on the state level or local level that they're very comfortable with. And I think that if we can get past the fear or concern or the distance between federal lawmakers and our practitioners and members, I think that would definitely help. And again, all lawmakers have district and state offices that you can connect with and establish more close relationships to talk about these issues. Invite them to, your organizations or site visits and have a real working relationship with them and be a resource. And we think that's great. It also helps inform legislation very closely. Another thing we heard this year when we were advocating, not necessarily for, we did work on the Community Development Block Grant disaster recovery. There was a really great bill that was introduced that we talked about several times in the call called the Reforming Disaster Recovery Act of 2019, which passed the House and was supported in a bipartisan way and was introduced in the Senate by one of our partners, Senator Schatz, as well as a great affordable housing advocate in the Republican Party, Senator Todd Young from Indiana. And we wanted to include language around housing counseling in that legislation. And we'll see if we can try to do that at some point next year, but we'll see. One of the things we heard from staff was that they didn't want to make it too divisive. And another thing we heard in particular was when they were drafting the legislation before introduction, they were hearing from several different stakeholders, including National League of Cities, National Governors Association, rural groups, and that determined what the provisions were in the bill. One thing we spoke many times about was about visibility of housing counseling. And so if these state and local entities, when they go and do their Hill Days, and they go and talk about what laws need to be changed, if they're not talking about or including housing counseling, it just becomes a lower priority on lawmakers' list. And we saw this play out during the appropriations process. When people come to the Hill, they're talking about Community Development Block Grant and Section 8 and housing counseling. While we did amazing work this year, it just wasn't talked about as much as strongly. So Lou, what stakeholders do you think housing counseling agencies could be working more closely with on a state and local level in sort of a joint effort to highlight the visibility of housing counseling, not just for advocacy purposes, but just to raise awareness, because a lot of advocacy is also media advocacy.
Right. So, you really want to look at the stakeholders that probably have just a little bit more bandwidth than the housing counseling agencies or the nonprofits. So your real estate or the realtors that get together. And so there's the Akron Cleveland Area Board of Realtors, and they took out the board, but it's ACAR. Everybody has that the realtors are involved in, and that is a really good place to be able to present on housing counseling and get some traction. And also at times they have a little grant money too, and whether it's a couple $1,000s or being able to present at their CLI classes, things like that. Any CRA groups, and so a lot of times the bankers will get together and have different CRA forums amongst themselves. They'll get together for lunch and and talk about CRA and what they're doing and how to be able to get their numbers up. And so that's a good place to be able to go. There was this small crisis in between 2008 and I would say probably still going on today. But one of the things that really get people's attention is when you say, hey, do you want to know what one of the greatest tools to avoid foreclosure are? They're like, what's that? And it's like, one of the top ones is housing counseling. To be able to be an educated homeowner and know what's coming down the pike. All of a sudden, you've got bipartisan support to that because nobody wants to see their constituents out on the street. And one side might look at it as a money-saving prospect, and the other could look at it as an equity prospect. And so you want to be able to move, your opponents. You want to be able to neutralize. And so when you're talking, you want to talk to everybody, not just the people who support you, but you talk to people who could be against that and neutralize. Get them to the point of saying, oh, okay, I can't support it, but I'm not going to be a voice against it. Then take the neutral people and move them to proponents and be able to show them, why it's truly important and what the leverage is. And then take the proponents to make them ambassadors, to make them be, your champions. It's very difficult to go from opponent to champion, but you can move people down that going forward.
Yeah, opponent versus champion. I think you've mentioned this at our previous call, and I always really like that analogy. I wouldn't say that when we do advocacy, we face any hostility, but a lot of it will come down to just lack of understanding. And so one thing we faced this year that we were kind of stunned by was that we had to educate committee staff on the process of how after appropriations, we have to send out a NOFA, they have to award the grant money, and then it goes out. Even something as small as that, the misunderstanding of how housing counseling works even, educating lawmakers. What would you suggest to an agency that wanted to do advocacy when the hostility appears to come from ignorance of the program? I know when I've been doing this, I've been doing advocacy, not just in housing counseling, but in financial literacy and such for about 10 years on and off. And a lot of what people will come down to is say, oh, well, I don't understand it, so I'm extremely biased, so I'm not even going to give you the time. What would you say to an agency that's really trying to educate different stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, it really goes back, I don't want to be cliche-ish, but to really doing the storytelling and being able to say, here's what happened. We didn't just come down with a wheelbarrow of money down the street. People worked at it. And here, a lot of times people hear housing counseling, and the people you're talking to, the only thing they know about counseling is laying on a couch and telling them, how bad a person they are. But really what it is to be able to let them know that this is what you're doing. Again, when you look, and they all expect the ask, and so, yes, you're going to ask for support for housing counseling, but at the end, you should ask, what can you do for them? How do you become the expert, the subject matter expert, for them to pick up the phone when somebody's squawking at them, like the chief of staff or the legislative director, and say, hey, what do you think of this? Or what's the resource? And so it has to be almost a two-way street as opposed to, oh, we're just going to ask. But once you become that subject matter expert, and being able to tell them, well, here's what housing counseling really is. It's not about just getting a house. It's about being financially successful after purchasing the house. And then that light bulb goes off. A lot of times we hear, affordable housing. Well, that's the key word, affordable housing. Show me somebody who didn't want to buy a house that was affordable. Whether you're in DC looking at a $400,000, 2-bedroom, half bath, take a shower when it rains kind of place, or in Cleveland, Ohio. Nobody says, oh, I want to buy a house that's not affordable. And so, being able to get to a common place, and do your research, we know, Senator Young's background and things along those lines. He read the book Evicted, and now he's all in on this. And if we could get every person's staffer to give them the book Evicted or some other kind of thing, because he was able to call the author and say, hey, Desmond, could you come into my office? And being a senator, that's able to happen, but you never know what's going to trip that. And, you're not going to always find that hostility, but there's times when they're not really paying attention. And you can't be offended by that. You have to be ready to go the next time. If they're out of session, there's a good chance that they're in jeans and they're just, trying to get through the day so they can, hit the Dubliner, where when they're in session, they're suited up, tied up, but they're also seeing somebody every 15 minutes. And it's important because if you're not there, somebody else is. So you better get there.
I liked your point on the storytelling piece, because oftentimes, and this might be the more traditional mode of lobbying, people will say, well, give us your executive summary, and they just see numbers and figures and facts. But storytelling is almost, it can be visual too, right? So for instance, what NHRC does is that we try to have pictures, pictures are worth 1,000 words, where we have images of, families getting this house or saving their home and making it more real. And we're always encouraging, and I'm still encouraging for 2020, that people submit their pictures, because what we would love to do is be able to send this to the Hill and say, hey, in your district or in your state, these are the sort of things that were happening. Beyond facts and figures and things, what sort of materials can people have to sort of have a story and engage that relationship, even if you're not there, like social media or pictures or so forth?
Right. So, social media, it's pretty easy. If you're on Twitter, tag the member, because somebody has to read that. And so if you have an event and you want to say, your member didn't come, but you used block grant money, I'd like to thank Congressman whoever for supporting CDBG. One, make sure that they do. But that's easy, and somebody's going to be able to read it. A lot of times when they're doing press conferences, so Senator Sherrod Brown would call us up and say, hey, I'm going to do something on VITA and EITC. Do you have a client that, can be involved in this that we can talk to and highlight? And at times it wasn't about, me or the organization. It was being able to, again, be that resource, introduce district staff to clients, prep the clients, and make sure that, that they're telling the right story that you want them to do. But, it's being able to do that, because you can give them the report, you can give them, a multi-page report, and somebody might go and read the executive summary. But if you give them a picture, you give them a one-pager, you give them an infographic, they're going to be able to relate right off the bat. You want to be able to get them to delve deeper in. But if you just drop off and say, hey, foreclosures have been terrible, here's the report from 2006 to 2019, you can see that, all these people lost their house. There's going to be some wonky people that are going to be like, oh, I want to go and look at the graphs and stuff like that. But chances are it's going to be recycled. In faster, the thicker it is.
This concept of being a resource for the congressional office, so not just the ask, it's really right on. And I would add to your list that we offer that we're let your district offices know we're available to work with people who are trying to buy a house, or people are having trouble with their mortgage, or whatever your specialties are, and really make sure they do that. I mean, our greatest champion for years was Charlie Dent, And he had a close working relationship with Lehigh Valley Community Action Council, and they handled all the predatory loans, all the foreclosures, and they were vital to the mission of his office. And that's retail politics.
And the thing is that you've got all these caseworkers, and and they're flowing in and out. They change quite regularly. And if they know, hey, I can call NHS, whatever, and move this case off my desk, and then follow up with this other person, so much the better.
I think that's great. I really liked your idea about the tagging lawmakers and engaging in that conversation. And we always really appreciate your time and attention to this and sort of these new ideas. I think really finding ways of engaging housing counseling agencies and the communities we serve is something that we have thought about in HRC. And I think as we go into 2020, we're definitely going to shape that out and think of more ways to reach more people and be more innovative in that. Because again, it's not just serving the communities and doing direct services, but it's also being at the forefront of the conversation. And that requires
more money, more mission.
Ooh, like that. More money, more mission. Love it. Good. Well, thanks so much. Do we have room for like one or two questions? Melody, is there one or two you want to just push through really quickly?
There were a few. David, you're still on. The big questions were, do you worry that Bank of America standard for a fee-to-service relationship to the Connect-to-Own program, which is $300, to be a low precedent compared to the relative work that housing counselors perform?
So just to clarify, is the question about whether I think that the amount is appropriate?
Yes.
Well, I think that we all know that the work that we do should be considered worth more than that. But the question is, how do we make sure that we are conveying that? And one of the ways that I think we'll be able to do that better is through the standardization of data, and then also piggybacking on what you, Melody, and Lou were talking about, of doing a better job of telling our story and showing the impact that we have.
Great, thank you. Next question, really quickly. This will be to you, Ellie. What are the number of individuals who have become HUD certified, one? And the second part of this is, could you break down which housing counseling services will no longer be available to housing counselors to provide after the August 1st, 2020 deadline for certification?
Sure. So as far as the number of housing counselors, I don't have a number of housing counselors. I don't know, Bruce, if you've gotten any intel on that or if anybody has. I do know that as far as agencies are concerned, it's 634 agencies, but I don't know the number of actual counselors that have passed. As far as the type of counseling, so basically no housing counseling can be done under HUD by a non-certified counselor. The only thing that somebody could do is homebuyer education, as long as your homebuyer education is very well supervised and overseen by a certified housing counselor. So if you have a person, what I will say is if you have somebody who's doing basic intake and just really taking some information from a client and not setting up an action plan or doing anything like that, then that person does not need to be certified. And, you know, one of the ways that HUD kind of clarified, they had a webinar recently that has probably been recorded and you may be able to go to on the HUD Housing Counseling website. I'm not sure if it's there or not. But one of the things that they went over was the things that they consider to be housing counseling. So if you are developing a budget and an action plan, that's housing counseling. And that cannot be done by somebody who is not certified after August 1st. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does answer the question. So I know you said it was about 600-something agencies that were certified, but how many agencies are there in total? Someone wants to know the percentage of those that have a certified counselor.
Well, it's 36% of all HUD-approved agencies. So do the math.
And well, yeah, there's 1,700 and somewhere between 17 and 1,800 agencies now. We're down from 2,400 and some. Last March we figured out that we'd already lost 540 agencies that had stopped providing the service, either because they closed their doors altogether or stopped providing that service, but to some others. But that was last March. I know there's been a few since then, and some consolidation.
Okay, I'm going to try and race through the last two. Councils are obtaining HUD certifications, creating a bidding war between other local agencies, where the value of a HUD certified counselor immediately has increased by $5,000 to $10,000 per year. How do you think we can still deliver the services with the cost of service delivery increasing?
Well, that's a tough question, right? It's been a topic of conversation, and it is one of the things that, again, going back to creating a fee-for-service model, and also David's comment about standardizing the data so that we can really present, this is what we do, and here's the impact that we have. That those are things that are going to help with our funding. And then again, back to, what Melody and Lou were talking about, and advocating and making sure that our lawmakers know what we do and how important we are to their constituents, all helps with future funding.
It is a basic problem of economics, and if you have a short supply, the price of that supply goes up, and so really there's a couple things we need to do. One is our job is to get as many counselors certified as absolutely possible. And partly that's why we're reaching out outside of the field to recruit more people, because we expect there'll be a shortage. And so we obviously want anybody who's in the profession now to pass the test and give them all the support they can, but we also need to add to the pool. The other side of this is that, in fact, there is a greater value to somebody who has certification in the marketplace. And so that means that we need to figure out how to raise more funds. And fee-for-service is a piece of this, but I think it's also, and it is sort of the good news of this problem is that there's a much higher awareness among lenders about both the level of the percentages of certification that's been done and concern about it, but also the concern about losing good counselors in the field, so that it makes for a stronger argument about increased funding. But we're hearing about this, and we're worried about it, and I think that's why we're doing these whole initiatives to really increase the pool of available counselors to complement who's already in the field. Does anybody else have any other thoughts to jump in on this? Well, it's a critical question. So what else do we got?
That's it?
Oh, that's it. Okay. So kind of rapid fire. Thanks, everybody, for this. I think we have a lot of stuff to look forward to in 2020. I will do some work on student loans. We will do some work. We'll certainly do a lot of work on certification and devote a lot of organizational pieces to this. We will continue to fight for increased housing counseling funding from the federal government, but I think we have to expect that we'll need to have other sources. We will work a lot harder on this innovations in housing counseling area to try to learn about and develop more opportunities that might not only increase your flow of clients and mission, but also increase funding. We're certainly trying to think about all this, very open to your creative ideas about how to address this in the year coming up. With that quick note, we're still doing a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we have they're useful to us, so please keep them rolling in. Make Ellie happy, make the rest of us happy too. All very good. And we will also encourage people to become members of NHRC if you aren't already. There has been an increase in the price of the housing counseling, on the discount we're getting on credit reports. It's a modest one this year, but it did happen again this year. And I'm happy to give anybody the list if they haven't seen it already. But we'll still have the discount. It's still a substantial savings for everybody who has it. And we are exploring, Ellie mentioned this about the student loan program. There was a fee involved with that, and we may do we'll see if we can't get a discount for members from that fee, so that it's if you want to do this for your staff, for example, as a staff benefit, which we think is very valuable, very important, then that might become a new benefit. I think it sounds like there's a lot of sympathy to doing this, so we'll have more on that probably by February. But it's been actually a very good year. We had a kind of oh my goodness, I can tell groups and we heard from groups that are having financial challenges, but really by the end of the year, groups have really come through on their membership, and some have upped their commitment, and we really, really appreciate that a lot. So thank you. We're going to have our next call on January 9th, and it's not the first Thursday, it's the second Thursday, and the reason for that is, it's because it's the start of the new year, and we didn't have enough time to do the publicity for you. But important call, because one of the areas that we didn't get to, but an area that's clearly an emerging issue, is around rental counseling. And there's a number of legislative initiatives around evictions and around protections for and getting bipartisan support. So Lou mentioned that Senator Todd Young got the book Evicted and was very interested in that. Senator Portman is one of the co-sponsors, a Republican from Ohio, for a bill to provide a more effective eviction protection program. So very interesting, and I think I would describe it as progressive legislation, certainly responsive. And as we're becoming more of a renter nation, this becomes an important issue, and we'll do some thinking about what the places are that groups can get develop income to do some of this work. It's certainly got its challenges, but there are a number of you are doing that work, and please feel free to reach out to us about what you're doing so that we might have a broader conversation around rental issues. But so the 9th we get started on that. We have plenty more set up for the year. I think it's going to be we got a lot to do, but I think we're the right people to do it, all of us. So thank you for being part of the collective whole of 2019. We worked pretty well together, and looking forward to 2020.